Iran War Monitor broadcast, June 23rd, 2025. Iran launches missile attack on U.S. forces in Qatar. Iran has fired 14 ballistic missiles at Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar today, marking the first direct Iranian military retaliation against U.S. forces following this weekend's American strikes on Iranian nuclear facilities. Fox News reported that all missiles were successfully intercepted by Qatari air defenses, with no U.S. casualties reported and no damage to military infrastructure. The attack represents a significant escalation in U.S.-Iran tensions while appearing deliberately calibrated to avoid triggering a larger conflict. The IRGC launched the missiles on Monday evening local time, targeting America's largest military installations in the Middle East. Pentagon official confirmed that Al Udeid Air Base was attacked by short-range and medium-range ballistic missiles originating from Iran, adding that U.S. forces had partially evacuated the base as a precautionary measure. President Trump monitored developments from the White House Situation Room as the attack unfolded. Tehran's calculated response to Operation Midnight Hammer was after the unprecedented U.S. strikes on June 21st and 22nd that targeted 3 Iranian nuclear facilities at Fordo, Natanz, and Isfahan. The Washington Post reported that B-2 stealth bombers dropped 30,000-pound bunker buster bombs in the first direct U.S. military action against Iran's nuclear program. The IRGC claimed today's attack delivered a, quote, devastating and powerful missile attack against what it called the largest strategic asset of the U.S. Army in West Asia. Iranian officials appeared to signal limited intentions with their response. Iran's Supreme National Security Council stated the number of missiles fired, 14, deliberately equaled the number of bombs the U.S. used in weekend strikes. While Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khamenei posted an image of a burning American flag with the message, "We will not surrender to anyone's aggression," Iranian officials emphasized their attack posed no threat to Qatari civilians, suggesting careful target selection to avoid broader escalation. Qatar ended up condemning its sovereignty violation as the region braces for more attacks. The Qatari government strongly condemned the attack as a flagrant violation of Qatar's sovereignty and airspace, while confirming its air defense system successfully intercepted all incoming missiles. One missile struck a building near the base but caused no military damage. Qatar temporarily closed its airspace and activated emergency protocols, though the Interior Ministry stated the security situation remained stable after lifting shelter-in-place orders within 3 hours after the attack. Kuwait and Bahrain also closed their airspace, while air raid sirens could be heard across Bahrain. The Washington Post reported that U.S. military installations throughout the Middle East elevated to maximum alert status, including Al-Assad Air Base in Iraq, forces in Syria, and naval support activity in Bahrain. Egypt, Jordan, and the UAE expressed diplomatic support for Qatar, while oil prices initially spiked before falling after news confirmed the limited scope of Iran's response. Russia condemned the initial U.S. strikes and pledged to support Tehran, while European allies urgently called for diplomatic de-escalation. The successful interception of all missiles in absence of American casualties may provide a temporary off-ramp from immediate further escalation, though some analysts, including those on the call today, warn the situation remains extremely volatile. President Trump, as of this broadcast, has not yet issued a specific statement about today's Iranian attack, though he warned earlier on Truth Social that, quote, any retaliation by Iran against the United States of America will be met with force far greater. Now, with that in mind, I want to bring Michael Rubin in, the Director of Policy Analysis for the Middle East Forum, to reflect on 2 specific items. The first, now that Iran has retaliated, is there an off-ramp for them and the United States to end this war? Is it at a point where Iran's nuclear program has been destroyed? The Israelis are, according to some media reports, starting to wrap up their operations. And on the other hand, the fact that they've now gone after a U.S. ally in the Gulf who ostensibly has a pretty good relationship with Iran, often playing a two-faced Janus game against the United States and her allies. What does this mean for the first time that Iran in decades has struck a Gulf territory?
Iran has torn a page from its playbook, the same playbook it used when it took revenge on Qasem Soleimani. Step 1, bluster. Warn that the gates of Armageddon the gates of hell are opening. Number 2, try to activate the anti-war left. Number 3, quietly behind the scenes, try to forewarn the target that they are the target so that no one is accidentally killed, so that this doesn't escalate. And then number 4, generate the attack, because as Sheikh Hatari has written in the Middle East Forum Observer, Khamenei's chief constituency are the 20% of the revolutionary youth who feed the security forces, who feed the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. They want to see these pictures of an attack, or at least hear the reports of an attack, to prove that the old man hasn't lost his edge. Now, behind the scenes, as long as he can satisfy that this attack has fulfilled his rhetoric, then he can avoid moving on in a way that would escalate and would lead him to lose. The question then becomes if he's learned his lesson, if he realizes that Donald Trump is going to play the same old game that previous presidents, both Republican and Democrat, have, where they're going to allow the Iranians to run down the clock. Donald Trump has said that the enriched uranium program needs to go. It needs to go. Second of all, when it comes to Qatar, I'm not so sure that Qatar is actually that Qatar is actually upset at being attacked. Qatar might actually look at this as a badge of immunity to show what sacrifice they've made for siding with the United States. They're going to trot this out every time they need to actually defend themselves for any sort of malfeasance. So now we're going to see some quiet diplomacy behind the scene. One final point, Greg. The Israelis and the Americans certainly want to take a pause, because we're about to start the Shiite holy month of Muharram. And on the 10th of Muharram is the anniversary, the holiday's called Ashura, that marks the martyrdom of Imam Hussein. We published something on this in Middle East Forum Observer as well. It's a time when religious passions run high, and if there are still attacks going on during Ashura, then Khamenei can rally Iranians, even middle-class, normally secular Iranians, around the flag.
Now, in terms of the larger picture, in your opinion, based off of what you've seen over the last 10, 11, 12 days, has the U.S. and Israel achieved their war goals?
I'm afraid that the United States has not. And you have a situation where perhaps we were hand-wringing for so long that the Iranians were able to extricate the enriched uranium. If we really don't know where it is right now, that is an intelligence failure on par, in my view, with the intelligence failure that led up and complicated the Iraq War. If we don't know where Iran's enriched uranium is, that's a major, major problem. And Trump's triumphalism can't hide that fact. We can't sweep it under the rug. We need to be able to intercept this. Now, one final policy prescription. When South Africa gave up its nuclear program in 1991, with a fully compliant government, mostly under Nelson Mandela, it took the International Atomic Energy Agency 19 years to certify the dismantling of that nuclear program. No one has that time. And the Israelis, and I doubt the Americans, trust the International Atomic Energy Agency that much. So who are we going to use to actually take physical custody of this nuclear program if the Iranians agree to forfeit it? I doubt either the Americans or the Israelis want to be on the ground in Iran prior to any Iranian-led regime change. And so then the question becomes, who else is out there? I would nominate the Indians. The Indians are the only country that's trusted by Israel, the United States, and Iran. And perhaps it's time to start thinking creatively about the next steps.
Thank you, Michael Rubin. We'll get back to you in a few. I'm now going to ask that Gil Hoffman from Honest Reporting, who has been diligently covering this episode, but I think he's been in Jerusalem for most of the time, Gil?
Yes, sir.
And you've been covering the headlines. And this is a very different beast from the October 7th war, from the Seven Front War, which I guess this is a continuation of, insofar as you have not had many countries going to bat for the Iranians, at least at the outset. And I wanted to ask you if you see the same thing in the media, and what's the general media outlay on this from Honest Reporting's perspective?
You know, Greg, it should have been better than it was since October 7th. Since October 7th, each of the 7 military battlefields have gotten easier every day since then. while the mainstream and social media battlefields each have gotten harder every day since then, with notable exceptions. When Israel got attacked from Iran a couple times, those were times that we got at least some empathy in the media. And one would have hoped that over the past 11 days, during this confrontation with Iran, that Israel would be treated better in the media. And unfortunately, no, it hasn't happened. They've been reporting this as a tit for tat with moral equivalence, as if Israel, which is attacking nuclear sites, is the same as the Iranians who are striking civilian populations. And we've seen now, since America got involved, that the American media has made it look like Donald Trump has done this for Israel, or even worse, for Netanyahu, as if there hasn't been a confrontation between Iran and the United States for 46 years since the 66 Americans were held hostage back then. If they're fighting the war for the Jewish state, then Jews in America are going to get hurt, and it's very, very dangerous.
Now, in your opinion, if you just look at the news cycle from the time that the U.S. started the operation against the Iranian nuclear enrichment facilities until today, when there was the, I think, pretty insignificant response by the Iranians against U.S. air bases and other bases in the Middle East, these 14 missiles, which were symbolic in nature. Was there any change in coverage from when the U.S. entered the war?
When the U.S. entered the war, the media became more critical and made it sound like there's now going to be an escalation in the Middle East, as if the Middle East hasn't been escalated for 626 days. I think that the Jews being held hostage right now in Gaza, if there's an escalation now, it's news to them. And hopefully, if it is, as your other panelists are saying, that this was a symbolic attack by Iran on America and Qatar, and now it can wind down, then that theory that America escalated for Israel won't come to fruition, and there won't be as much problems, and the coverage maybe can then get better.
We have Karis Melnitzer on here who's going to offer some commentary in a little bit. She just appeared on Timcast, which is one of these very popular podcasts which are out, and really got into it with one of the hosts, and we'll hear about that. But have you been doing any review at all of some of the woke right media, Tucker Carlson, Candace Owens, a few others that should be coming to mind right now, but I forget their names, and comparing their rhetoric about this war with those on the far left, who, it seems to me, a lot of these individuals have similar talking points. They're making similar arguments, and it's as if there's a point of convergence between the two polar opposites on the political spectrum.
So I'm aware that there's a horseshoe theory they talk about, where Israel gets attacked by both the far right isolationists and the far left. And you know what, Greg? The good news is they both lost. America proved that it would come to Israel's side in a way in this war that was beyond anything ever done before. When Israel struck the nuclear reactor in Iraq, America got Israel condemned in the United Nations Security Council and actually initiated an arms embargo temporarily. When Olmert struck the nuclear facility in Syria, America stayed out of it. And here, America is supporting us. The isolationists on the right didn't get their way. The kooks on the left didn't get their way. And Israel and America both won. And that's something to be celebrated.
Now, the last thing I want to ask you before we get to the rest of our panel is there anything that Israel's Public Information Directorate, the public diplomacy branch of the Israeli government, has done well since this operation began? Or is there still a lot of the problems that have plagued Israel's spokespeople since October 7th?
They have certainly been engaged with the media. There was a briefing today, an official one, where questions could be asked. I know that the IDF spokesman's unit has been active. That they've certainly been putting out video of everything that Israel has done in striking in Iran with very accurate maps, and that's more than they did before. The spokesman's unit of the army has come a long way, but absolutely, there's a lot more that can be done to explain Israel better to the world. So, and if they don't, then we're in trouble.
Gil Hoffman from Honest Reporting. Thanks for joining the Middle East Forum's Iran War Monitor this afternoon. Stay safe. Now I'm going to bring on Daniel Pipes, the founder of the Middle East Forum, who, when he and I were discussing this event as it was unfolding on Saturday and on Sunday, he made a very unique point about how President Trump has done something as it relates to American national security policy relating to nuclear weapons and nuclear programs that no other president has done. And Daniel, I was hoping you might be able to elaborate on this, how this is really a remarkable moment in modern American foreign policy. Daniel, I think that you're muted. What we'll do is, if we can't fix this issue, we'll get back to you in a few. Okay. Enough. We can help with Daniel's technical issue there. I'd like to get to Jonathan Spire, who is joining us from Jerusalem. Jonathan, we haven't had you on the War Monitor yet, but you said that this is the real beginning of the Iran-Israel war. And I want to know what you meant by that when you wrote that, and how you see this ending. And also, if you could give us a scorecard. How well is Israel doing? How well is Iran doing? How does this play out over the next week?
First of all, hi, Greg. First of all, with regard to what I meant by this being the real outbreak of the Israel-Iran war, I mean, it wasn't really any particularly profound or metaphorical point. It was simply that, you know, all of us, I think, in Israel, let's say of our kind of, or my kind of generation, my age, have been dealing for most of our adult lives with the Israel-Iran conflict as a central part of our lives, whether we're aware of it or not. That's to say, those of us who served in the security zone in Lebanon in the mid-80s and 90s, taking part in the opening act, so to speak, of the Israel-Iran conflict. Those who lived through the Intifada lived through an insurgency in which the other side were financed by and trained by Iran. Those who fought in Lebanon in 2006 were fighting a high war against an Iran-led militia. So it means that, you know, security policy in Israel has been defined generation by the Israel-Iran conflict. But what's happened in the course of the last year is that the conflict has graduated on from being a proxy war to being a open conflict between two states, Israel and Iran. Of course, first of all, in April of last year, when Iran made the decision to launch its first barrage of drones and missiles against Israel, Israel hit back. Then again in October of last year, when a similar round of exchanges took place between Iran and then Israel hitting back much more determinedly at the end of October. And now, of course, this month, with a direct ongoing air campaign and missile campaign going on between the two countries. I say for the first time, the two states are in a certain sense fully engaged against one another to the extent that that is possible. There isn't a ground war going on simply because in the previous year, Israel has effectively dismantled the ground assets that would have been available to Iran. But the two countries have essentially been going at it to the best of their abilities using air capacity now for the last 2 weeks. That's what I mean in terms of this being the first open Iran-Israel war.
And there's been some other reports coming out that the IDF has deployed new capabilities. There's a report in the Jerusalem Post this morning about its electromagnetic warfare unit or some of the optical units that they've used. You have reports of the Iron Beam being deployed. You have new capabilities that we have not heard of before. And even there was this report during Operation Narnia, the simultaneous assassination of 9 or 10 Iranian nuclear scientists. The Mossad deployed new weaponry. Any commentary on the latest technology and methods that the Israelis have used in order to try and beat back the Iranians?
Yeah, first of all, with regard to the presence of people working for Israel on the ground in Iran, large numbers, this has been commented on by a variety of observers as remarkable, and remarkable it certainly is. At the same time, we shouldn't really, if we're doing our job as analysts, have been taken totally by surprise by this, because there were indications already back in October when we looked at Israel's response to the Iranian attack of October, that Israel had a ground capacity there in Iran. The indications being that there was a drone factory destroyed in Isfahan, I believe, as part of that counterattack, and it was destroyed then by quadcopters. It was clear that it had been attacked by drones on the ground. Now, you can't fly a quadcopter, obviously, from Israel to Iran, which meant that even then there were indications of this quite remarkable ground capacity that Israel has built up, such that it's able to truly, as an organization on the ground there around, which it can bring to life, which it can activate, and then which it can go back to, back underground again. I don't think we've seen anything quite like that in the past. Of course, Israel has intelligence coverage of a number of surrounding countries, but the notion of Israel being able to project power that way, and in such a decisive way, right into the heart of the Iranian scientific and military establishment, I think is quite remarkable. More broadly, also, if we look at you were talking about the scorecard. I mean, if we look at the scorecard in terms of the attempt by the Iranians to get a war of attrition going, which is clearly what they want, that's where they think their strength comes in, then I think we can again see the pretty effective nature of Israeli air defenses. Look, every life lost is a tragedy. But the fact of the matter is that for the last 11 days, we've had the Iranians throwing pretty much everything they got at us from the sky. And up until now, the death toll is 24 Israelis. Once again, the loss of any individual is a tragedy. But that's not a high number of people. That's not an unmanageable number of people. And it means that if we do end up being pulled into a war of attrition, which could still happen, Israel, I think, contrary to some predictions, is well placed right now to be able to keep this up for quite some time. There's no sense in which the public nerves or the public will or support are in any way frayed by the extent of what the Iranians have been able to throw at us so far. Nevertheless, of course, the damage to property is, concentrates the mind. I happened to be in Ramat Aviv over the weekend looking at sites that have been hit by Iranian ordnance. And sure, it's a pretty awesome thing to see. It reminds me of some of the things I've seen in other conflicts throughout the region. But in terms of the scorecard so far, Israel's well able to come through this. And the amount of damage that Israel has been doing within Iran to sites associated with the nuclear program, but also the regime itself and also the military is remarkable.
Now, there's some reports, and we have some questions here in the chat, both from YouTube and from Riverside, that there may be Iranian troops defecting to Reza Pahlavi. More broadly, is there any signs from your sources in Iran, from things you've heard, from your network of individuals who keep you informed, of potential dissent now in the regime? There was one story that came out, and there was no attribution, nor can I verify its accuracy, that the Assembly of Experts was trying to get together. This is the body that elects Iran's supreme leader. What's happening inside the country, and insofar as it relates to the possibility of regime change, how close is Iran to it?
My own sense, at least, from what I'm hearing, and I do have people that I speak to in Iran, is that there is not yet anything notable or noticeable in terms of popular movement on the streets. That is not yet happening. There are no widespread demonstrations. There are no big protests. And my sense, at least from who I'm speaking to, and this is the way I've had it put to me also in the last 24 hours, is that the barrier of fear has not yet been broken. I mean, it's not that people are rallying to the regime. It's not that the sort of 70 or 80% of Iranians who don't support the regime are suddenly, yeah, but our country is being attacked, we have to be around it. That's not the effect I'm hearing, but it is that people don't yet have the sense that they would not be in terrible danger to their lives if they were to go onto the streets and begin to protest. And that barrier of fear has not yet been broken. I'm also hearing what you're hearing about, rumors, really, I think it is still, but about, potential discontent and splits within the regime itself. I think it's too soon, though, to draw any firm conclusions about that. There's an interesting thing on social media in which opposition voices are saying to the IDC and to the regime people, now is the time to come over to us. Like, it's not late. Now's the time to abandon the regime. And that's a call which is being heard. Whether it's the case that some regime people have begun to answer that, we hear rumors. I don't think there's anything more concrete at this stage. But certainly, I think the key point to make is that we're hearing all kinds of interesting stuff. Israel hit Evin prison today, right? An act of massive symbolic importance. And that's being received by Iranians and noted. It's not yet leading, none of this is yet leading to visible signs on the street of the barrier of fear having been broken and Iranians starting to move against the regime in large numbers.
Jonathan Spire, MEF's Director of Research, I hope you'll stay with us as we answer some of the audience's questions in the second half of this conversation. Now I'm going to ask that Karis Rea join us. Karis is currently working on a book that I think is supposed to come out October, but Karis will correct me. But Karis, you had this very interesting interaction with Tim Pool from Timcast. And I want to just take what you said during that maybe an hour or 2 hour program about the Israel-Iran conflict, the potential involvement for the United States. I guess it was filmed prior to the U.S. bombing on Saturday night. And just, can you take this as an example and sort of give us your thesis on where the woke right is now that President Trump committed and acted on trying to destroy the Iranian nuclear program?
Sure. Well, thanks for having me. You can hear me okay? Everything's good?
Yeah, great.
Okay, great. Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't classify Tim as woke right, but I definitely think that a lot of his supporters are. And I think he definitely enables and flirts with that crowd a little bit. But what's really interesting, I think, since the war broke out is that you have actually seen a much more clearer line of the conservatives who are prepared to stand with the US, with Trump, with Israel, and the conservatives who have essentially completely broke from the MAGA movement. Many of them who consider themselves pro-Trump, America First, MAGA conservatives. I mean, they would still call themselves America First, but in actuality, they have become like full-blown isolationists. And some of them had maybe been flirting with this before, but I didn't expect them to firmly land on this side. These are people like Jack Posobiec or Matt Walsh, who kind of famously said he never comments on this stuff because he doesn't know anything about it. And now suddenly he's tweeting out opinion after opinion about this. I was very surprised by Steve Bannon, who had an interview with Tucker Carlson before the U.S. attacked and pretty much endorsed Tucker Carlson's view, especially because I've spoken to Bannon and, out of respect for him, I'm not going to reveal what he said to me, but let's just say that he seemed to have done a complete 180 on that front. So, and then there's obviously the predictables. I mean, Thomas Massey, the Congress people, Thomas Massey, Marjorie Taylor Greene, Rand Paul. These people are of the whole "I'm not dying for Israel" crowd. Massey introduced a resolution, which that's no surprise. They always fail. And let's see, there's Douglas McGregor. He famously said that Pakistan announced that they were going to nuke Israel, and then one day later they basically closed their border. So I think there's a lot of this whole crowd has just been getting everything wrong from the get-go, and it's not stopping now. And yet I think there's a few of them that have been a little bit humbled, but then there's a handful of them that I'm just surprised have completely doubled down. That I wouldn't have thought about. And there's a very, very clear streak. And what's interesting is Trump, notably President Trump, is actually calling out some of these people. He's called out Tucker Carlson a few times. Now Ted Cruz is calling out Tucker Carlson. This has become very mainstream. President Trump called out Thomas Massey.
Karis,
so there's a split.
Do you think that they have now, that they're on the wrong side of history, lost any of their influence? Or is there the potential for a fracture in Republican Party foreign policy circles, where they're now going to carve out something very much like you had the progressive wing of the Democratic Party, the DSA types, but on this specific issue and larger about the need for America to pull back its role in the world stage?
That's a great question. And I think it depends what sphere of influence. I think on the governmental level, I am hopeful that they have largely been marginalized, as we've seen from Trump's actions and his rhetoric. But on a cultural level, I don't necessarily think that that is the case. These people have been very, very popular, especially with the youth. And all of the polls that are coming out are showing that the under 30 MAGA conservative crowd is much less sympathetic to Israel than they used to be, and has assumed much more of a utopian, isolationist, anti-war, leftist posturing. So I think that's really where I would worry, is actually the next generation of the Republicans, not so much the administration and what's going to happen with that, which I was more hesitant before about and worried about.
Karis, I hope you'll stay with us. We have a lot of other topics to cover, but thank you for that input.
Thank you.
Now we're going to bring Jordan Cope, who in the past has served as the Qatar Finance Fellow for the Middle East Forum. And Jordan, I know we just brought you on, but you're still staying with us?
I am. Today I'll be speaking in my Qatari Finance Fellow capacity, but happy to answer however many questions you have.
Well, one of the things that I wanted to do was play a real quick compilation of the streets of Doha from the instance where the alarm started going off, and see how the Qataris actually reacted to this.
Allahu Akbar. Madam.
And I guess at first it's kind of, they're looking in awe at these missiles and these interceptors coming over the air. This is right over Doha City. This isn't even that close to Al Udeid Air Force Base. There's a clear line of sight to the Iranian missiles coming in, and the U.S. trying to intercept them with Patriot PAC-3 anti-missile interceptors. But then what really gets interesting is that you start seeing the reaction in more Qatari public spaces, that I think there's a DJ playing in the background while they're just looking at the night sky lighting up. There on the eastern side, the rockets coming in. On the western side, the American interceptors coming to take them out. I mean, this was really a spectacle for anybody who was in Doha tonight. But the one that I really was interested in seeing, I guess we don't have that film right now, but it was the Qataris, sort of running away from everything that had happened there. And is this symbolic of the Qataris now maybe shifting their role, having played, cover for Iran for the better part of a decade plus, and now maybe they'll change their position regarding the country? Or do you think this is just a big behind-the-scenes setup, like Michael Rubin said beforehand, saying that the Qataris are going to use this every single time they get criticized in the United States now for the next 10 years, saying, we defended you over the skies of Doha. We are definitely with America, even though they'll still be involved in their games and tricks behind the scenes?
I definitely happen to agree with Michael. We should not forget Qatar and Iran's ties over the years and how precious they were to Qatar, especially during the Quartet blockade of Qatar between 2017 and 2021, when Qatar Airways or Qatari planes needed to avoid that boycott from Egypt, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Bahrain. It ultimately used Iran's sovereign territory to land planes and to fly over Iran to get back to Qatar, hoping spare the country during that economically detrimental boycott. I definitely think Qatar is going to milk this for what they can. It should be noted that Qatar, one of the biggest airport hubs in the world, being in Doha, had shut down its airspace prior to the attacks incoming. And so while Qatar has condemned the attack publicly as a flagrant violation of its sovereignty, at the same time, it can use this incident and the softball pitch that Iran likely gave Qatar in advance to justify further weapon sales to Qatar in the future that have now amounted to billions of dollars over the years. And if there's anything that Qatar needs over its existence since its founding, well, I guess in later years, it is the protection of the United States from other countries in the GCC from which Qatar has endured hostilities with. And so the US protection of the Al Udeid base on its soil gives Qatar a lifeline if it happens to experience another setback, as it did with those GCC countries during the recent boycott.
Right. It wasn't just the US, though, that was a backstop for the Qataris. The only way that Qatar Airways was able to get out of Qatar Airport in Doha was flying through Iranian airspace. So they had to rely both on the Iranians to be able to come and go from the country, to have a supply line that would be able to fly in goods to the airport because of all the other blockade items that were going on from land and from sea. The aerial blockade around 75, 80% of their airspace. But also there's a significant economic asset that Qataris share with the Iranians. And that is the Fars gas field, one of the largest natural gas fields, offshore natural gas fields in the country. And now that the Qataris have been struck by the Iranians, they've condemned them. But if you see in the Iranian messaging, they say about Qatar, this is not meant to be an attack on our quote, brotherly country, Qatar. It's an attack on U.S. air bases there. Will there be any shift in the relationship between Qatar and Iran?
I don't think there's going to be such a public shift anytime immediately. It will ultimately depend on how the US pressures Qatar to move, which will determine ultimately how Qatar will respond. But Qatar definitely has a relationship out of necessity, but not just out of necessity, sometimes out of preference with Iran. Every now and then they sponsor the same terrorist groups such as Hamas, even though they generally disagree over which factions of Islamists they support, Iran being generally a country that supports Shiite Islamist movements, in Qatar, one Sunni or Salafist related. And so they definitely do have to have ties because of that shared gas field, the Fars gas field. But I think how Qatar is ultimately going to respond is to milk this. I mean, Qatar is a king of soft power diplomacy. And the ultimate goal of that soft power diplomacy is to convince the West that they are aligned with them, while simultaneously subverting the West, whether it be through its headlines via its state-sponsored Al Jazeera, or through sponsoring anti-Western terrorist movements, or through offering military bases to the US and then curtailing where they can use that base to launch attacks too. And so I ultimately think they're going to portray this as an alignment with the US, but at the same time, they've also condemned the US's intervention in Iran with those 3 nuclear facilities.
Jordan Cope, Middle East Forum's Qatar Finance Fellow. Thank you very much for joining us today. I hope you'll stay with us as we get to our panel discussion. And now we're going to bring on Eric Navarro, the Director of Military and Strategic Programs for the Middle East Forum, to play out what the U.S.'s next options are regarding the response to Iran's response. Eric, will there be one? If there is, are we going to look at strikes beyond the nuclear programs? President Trump threatened Iran and said, you better not retaliate. Here Iran is retaliating, even though it doesn't seem like there's much battle damage having been done in the wake of Iran's retaliation. What's your take?
Well, the news reports are that President Trump has called this, quote, a very weak response and still hopes for peace. So I think, and there's sources that are leaking that the White House is not signaling that they want to get any further involved in conflict. So that's signaling that they're taking this retaliation by the Iranians as a sign that they want an off-ramp. I think the fact that there was advance warning, and President Trump is quoted as saying that he knew of the missile launches in advance. I don't know if that's true or not, but that's what he said. Or that's what's being reported, he said. I know the Qataris did. And then the 14 for 14 matching also is a signal that Iran is not looking to escalate. And so I think that if we are keeping the U.S. is keeping its goals of action very limited to just destroying the the nuclear capabilities or nuclear weapons program, and if the intel confirms that we've done that, that the U.S. strike has done that, then they're going to just simply coordinate. The U.S. is going to coordinate with Israel on the further action. That is holding in reserve the ability to retaliate to against Iran at further targets if Iran escalates.
Eric, I want to just really quick bring Michael in here because he mentioned this in his remarks, but isn't this sort of 5 years later a repeat of the actions after the assassination of Qasem Soleimani?
I mean, I really do see this as the playbook from Qasem Soleimani. The difference is Qasem Soleimani was gone. There is no bringing him back. The question now is whether the Iranians can get away with using this playbook, but somehow through diplomacy cause us to snatch defeat from the jaws of victory by somehow compromising and allowing themselves to retain a core nuclear program.
Thank you, Michael. Eric, I want to just follow up on that for a second. And the Israelis have said that they are now going to treat Iran like they treated Hezbollah in Lebanon after October 7th. That anytime they get intelligence that the Iranians are trying to resurrect their nuclear program, anytime there's intelligence that the ballistic missile capability may be redeveloped, they will just go in and strike again. So is there some sort of average or some sort of mean in terms of the way that the Iranians have their capabilities having been reduced, degraded, destroyed to a certain level, that Israel's new strategy is to keep it there rather than to allow them to redevelop? And if that's the case, what does that mean in terms of a war of attrition, long-term security, any sort of diplomatic goals that the president's going to try to get out of this? Because notably, he just went after the nuclear program. He didn't go after ballistic missiles. He didn't go after proxies. He didn't go after other capabilities. He let the Israelis do that.
Yeah, but they're working hand in glove. And so that's the point. This is strategic combined arms at the highest levels. So even on the strike on Fordow and the other facilities by the U.S., coordinated with Israeli fighters to take out potential Iranian air defenses for the strike package. So they're working hand in glove to address the different targets that they can take out. I want to point out, by the way, Michael brought up about whether or not the U.S. has achieved its aims. Depends on what aims you're talking about. A, it reestablished deterrence. B, it's especially based on the Iranian retaliation or limited retaliation, it's warning them to not escalate. And C, there's reports, the Senator Mullen was on CNBC, and he said that the U.S. intel indicates that the Iranians were not able to get the enriched uranium out of the facilities. We should be obviously, we got to wait for full battle damage assessment and other intel reports, but I think the U.S. has achieved significant objectives here, and the Israelis definitely have. And then one final point to what you were talking about, what that mean. The Israelis have demonstrated to the Iranians and to the region that at any time they can gain air supremacy over Iran and strike targets at will. And so that's to your point. If and when in the future they think the Iranians, let's say the regime survives, if the regime ever tries to rebuild its nuclear weapons program, the Israelis can go in and strike at will.
Thank you, Eric Navarro. Stick around. We'll get back to you right after Dexter Van Zyl comes up. Now, Dexter, you wrote an opinion piece for the publication where you're the managing editor of Focus on Western Islamism on Shia communities in the United States and some of the rhetoric that's been coming out of there. And I was hoping that you might be able to share a brief monologue with us about that piece and to give us your reflection on that.
I think what we're seeing right now is an attempt on the part of, Shia imams here in the United States and also NIAC to make the same type of messaging that they think will work to appeal to the woke right.
Dexter, if you could clarify what NIAC is, that would be helpful.
The National Iranian American Council, which is essentially, for lack of a better word, is an organization that works to promote the Iranian narrative here in the United States. I would say that it's basically very closely tied to the Iranian regime, but it tries to portray itself as a non-religious, non-Islamist organization while the imams that I've paid attention to in Dearborn are clearly Islamists, but they make the same message. They want to portray Benjamin Netanyahu as using President Donald Trump as essentially his puppet. And one of the things that I saw when I went to England was that essentially the Islamists that I spoke to all think that the United States is under the control of Israel, American Jews, and some sort of worldwide Jewish conspiracy. And essentially the same narrative comes out of Islamists and their allies in NIAC here, is that Benjamin Netanyahu controls President Donald Trump, and that President Donald Trump is breaking his promise to the MAGA right to not get involved in any of these forever wars. And also they portray Israel as the aggressor. They don't acknowledge the fact that Iran has been talking about the United States as the great Satan for decades. And so what they're trying to do is to portray some sort of huge difference of interest between Israel and the United States in dealing with Iran, but they don't understand the huge level of suspicion on the part of huge numbers of the American people who experienced the Iran hostage crisis, know that Iran has killed hundreds of U.S. soldiers and has hated the United States for a long time.
Dexter, there was a report that came out on NBC News last night about the potential for the activation of Iranian sleeper cells in the United States. Now, I know you're not an expert as it relates to counterterrorism and the work of the FBI, but you have been monitoring the rhetoric coming out of these Shia Iranian, philo-Iranian or philo-regime mosques. Has there been any calls for violence here from these institutions?
No, there's been no calls for violence. There have been basically implicit warnings saying, look, if you attack Iran, American troops in the region are going to be put at risk. But the anemic response that just took place earlier today against the base in Qatar demonstrates that essentially, at least from my perspective, that those threats are not really credible. And I think we're going to see the one thing is that if those threats don't pan out, I think that we're going to see the anti-regime activists in the Iranian diaspora take a much more aggressive tone against these imams in places like Dearborn and in Houston and say, look, these people really are representing a paper tiger. We don't need to be afraid of them. And we need to essentially take them on in American civil society, say they're defending a misogynist, anti-Semitic regime. The failure of Iran to really muster any sort of damage against Israel and the United States has, I think, strengthened the hand of the pro-democracy forces in the Iranian diaspora here in the U.S. and hopefully the rest of the world.
All right. Thank you, Dexter Van Zyl, for Focus on Western Islamism. We're now going to bring onto the stage here, and Enough will let them back in from backstage. We're going to try to answer some audience questions that came in from Facebook, YouTube, from Riverside, Twitter, elsewhere. And we're aware, just as a point, of some of the technical issues here. We'll still try to deal with them, perhaps go back to Zoom, but we're only a week into this technology. It's kind of, engineering by war, if you want to really look at it that way. And really trying to get this to work. But let's go here. So the first question we have is from Carrie, who asks, do we have an assessment as to how much enriched uranium Iran managed to remove from the Fordow and Isfahan enrichment sites? And if so, where it might be stored? I'm going to go to Jonathan Spire to help us answer this question.
I actually think that we, at least as far as the public domain is concerned, we don't have answers to questions, and it's a big issue that and I'm not convinced that our governments know either. In other words, I think there may well be, unless we get clarity on this in the next period, there may be a significant intelligence failure. Right now, at least as far as public sources are concerned, I'm not aware of answers to those questions.
Okay, thank you, Jonathan. Alan asks, shouldn't the Israelis and Americans have a better handle on where the Iranian missiles are located? Eric, what's your take?
Well, they've already taken out a significant number. There's pre-identified targets, and then there's ones that are hidden that they have to wait until there's motion, or there's a heat signature, or there's a launch, and that's when they swoop in and take out those launchers. I would assume that the Iranian regime is not firing off all launchers all at once because they're trying to husband their resources. But again, Israel is taking out those launchers and the stockpiles in a systematic way. So there, you could see it as the numbers dwindle as far as the number of launches per day.
Thank you, Eric. I'm going to bring Alex Selsky, who we have not heard from yet, to answer this question. Len asks, any possibility of the Iranian public wanting to be, and I think that it dropped off for that question, but maybe wanting to be against the regime. And Alex, what I wanted to ask you was, you have been part of the messaging on this operation as a spokesperson for Home Front Command since the opening salvo by the Israeli Air Force. What kind of message is the IDF and the Israeli government sending to the people of Iran? And has there been any positive response to that message going to the Iranian people?
Well, we definitely see the IDF spokesman and the Prime Minister himself speaking directly to the Iranian public and Iranian society and trying to encourage them to rise against the regime. I remind you that in the very beginning, Israeli government didn't speak that there is a goal to dismantle the regime. And with time, the Minister of Defense openly speaks about, dismantling the regime and hitting, assassinating even Khamenei directly. And we see a lot from people that appear in the media that are in touch with the Iranians within Iran, that Iranians, they speak about the fact that Netanyahu and Israelis became heroes and that they want Israel to strike even more. As many panelists spoke before, we don't know what does it mean. We don't know if there is a possibility for transition, because we know how the opposition is divided, not organized, but we definitely see Israel trying to encourage Iranians to rise, because everybody understands that it doesn't matter how hard we hit the nuclear program, if there will not be regime change, regime shift, everything can get back and the challenge can meet us in few years again.
Thank you, Alex. Now, one of the things that we have asked here is by Jay, and he asks, are the Israelis running low on munitions? Jonathan, I'm going to go to you to answer this. Okay, I think Jonathan's feed may have, he was on mute. Okay, we're going to go back to Jonathan. Eric, your take on this.
Well, there's been conflicting reports. Of course, they are having to use a lot of the interceptors each night to deal with the threats and the missile launches from Iran. I will say, President Trump has already signaled enormous support for Israel, so I expect replenishment of those interceptor missiles as a regular part of the war effort and the coordination between the different countries. But I will say I can't report on the specific numbers. That would probably be better for either Alex or Jonathan.
Okay, thank you very much, Eric. Now we're going to go to Gil Hoffman again. And Gil, I wanted to ask you, have there been any pleasant surprises from the mainstream media besides those in the traditional conservative supporters of Israel, folks on CNN, MSNBC, any written press who have applauded Israel's actions as it relates to the Iranian nuclear program?
You had an editorial in Times of London that thanked Israel for making the world a safer place. They nailed it, and then this was a big surprise. This isn't a newspaper known for being particularly pro-Israel. I hope that there'll be, once America is cleared as being out of the conflict, if it works the way that Donald Trump wanted, perhaps there'll be more praise from American media outlets later on, but I wouldn't hold your breath.
Karis, any surprises from the left?
From the left. Well, I think actually since October 7th, there has been some voices at the traditional left-wing legacy media that were always semi-moderate, but have come out more in support of Israel, like Dana Bash and Van Jones and Jake Tapper, Chris Cuomo, right? So I think from individual voices at these news networks that are known as being fairly left-wing, there has been some moderating positions there, but I wouldn't say as a whole any of the left.
Yeah, Jordan, I'm not sure if you covered this, but were you looking at Al Jazeera when the missiles were falling? What was their reaction?
I haven't had the time today to review Al Jazeera's coverage, but I would like to add on to what the previous two said. I might not have focused so much on leftist media outlets, but if you focus on traditional establishment politicians in Europe, I was actually quite surprised by some of their responses. Germany, for instance, making clear that it stands with Israel. Chancellor Merz making clear that he stands with Israel. I think the British government as well had a fairly favorable pro-Israel stance, as did the French government. Governments that have been very, very critical of Israel in recent weeks in regards to its operations throughout the Middle East. So I'm sure Al Jazeera has probably been relatively quiet, if I had to speculate, not wanting to, I guess, ruffle opinions on Iran or Qatar and trying to keep things focused and spotlighted on Israel, but it yet to be seen and look forward to reviewing it.
This one's going to go to Alex from Daniel. Can someone comment on progress in the Gaza campaign and if the hostage situation might be affected by the direct confrontation with Iran? Alex, you've got 1 minute left.
Well, definitely, yes. The very fact that Israel assassinated and killed the person that was actually responsible on behalf of Iran for Hamas definitely means that they will have less support, less money. So definitely we all anticipate that it will affect the deal and the defeat of Hamas. Not immediately maybe, but definitely in the future.
I want to thank our panel. Dexter Van Zyl, focused on Western Islamism. Jordan Cope, Qatari Finance Fellow for Middle East Forum. Karis Rayar, MEF Writing Fellow. Gil Hoffman, Executive Director of Honest Reporting. Eric Navarro, our Director of Military and Strategic Programs. Alex Selsky, Director of MEF Israel. And Jonathan Spire, MEF's Director of Research, for this broadcast today. Again, we'll try to address some of these technical issues after this broadcast. You can find us on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, LinkedIn, and at our website, www.meforum.org. There will be a new update of the Iranian War Monitor this evening at www.iranwarmonitor.com. And for all the latest breaking news as it relates to the Iran war, or the U.S.-Israel-Iran war, we still have to name it, please tune in to the Middle East Forum. Thank you and have a good evening.